Well, hello there, Space Monkeys. Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden. In this episode, we're going to be again showcasing one of my favorite journalists and going over a wonderful piece that he did for Mint Press News about 2 weeks ago. So I'm a little late to the party, but this is a really important piece by Dan Cohen, and I highly recommend you follow him on Twitter. He does Behind the Headlines. He's a wonderful journalist, and this article that he wrote for Mint Press News really kind of encapsulates what I've talked about on my show before about how propaganda works. It's not simply like just trying to convince people with lies that you tell in a convincing way on your platforms. It also has to do with smearing or censoring competition, truth tellers, and doing bot farms, troll farms, getting a whole bunch of people that are mostly like useful idiots on board using, CIA-driven PR firms and using CIA-backed large platforms to then disseminate to the useful idiots, and that way they kind of maintain this defense mechanism against people that are telling the truth while they're telling lies, while they're spreading their propaganda. And that's part of propaganda in the digital age. Is it's not enough to just convince people that your lies are truth. You have to also convince those same people that everyone else's truth are lies by smearing them or destroying their reputation, or by, taking them down off the internet entirely. So I've warned about this. We have to fight both of those parts of the propaganda apparatus by promoting our good journalists, making sure their work gets out there. If they get censored, we need to raise high hell to get them uncensored, which I've been doing as much as I can on this show. And at the same time, we have to dismantle the lies that their propaganda apparatus is spewing to us. It's a two-part battle. So this article really does a great job at explaining how, Ukrainian PR firms and people that have previously worked for intelligence are uniting to create a PR network. They're calling it a PR network to help promote the war in Ukraine and promote the Ukrainian people and their army, which really all it is a very sophisticated propaganda apparatus, which is the exact thing that I would like us all to try to combat. It's the opposite of Political Fight Club. Political Fight Club destroys networks that are like this by exposing them, and that's why this is such a great article. So I'm going to read to you the first couple of sections, then we're going to skip down to the bottom. We're going to talk about the troll farms. We're going to give you some context as to how this PR network came to be, and we're also going to talk about a dossier that the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs gave to a collection of PR firms, telling them basically what they can and can't say, what language they can and can't use when they're talking about the Ukrainian crisis, and also it delineates what useful propaganda mainstream media outlets in America are useful for disseminating this false information. And, quote, surprise, surprise, spoiler alert, CNN, the Washington Post, everybody that you would expect, BBC, are all listed in that dossier. And it also goes so far as to say, we need to use these trolls, use these bot farms, use these media apparati that are already established at propagating propaganda. At the same time, we have to do smear tactics against these other areas that are going to expose us and make sure that they are censored off of, for instance, Facebook. So it's interesting. This is in a microcosm what I've always talked about, how propaganda operates, and we need to understand that it is both of those things, and we can fight both of them together. So this is called Ukraine's Propaganda War, International PR Firms, DC Lobbyists, and CIA Cutouts by Dan Cohen. It came out in late March. Since the Russian offensive inside Ukraine commenced on February 24th, the Ukrainian military has cultivated the image of a plucky little army standing up to the Russian Goliath. To bolster the perception of Ukrainian military mettle, Kiev has churned out a steady stream of sophisticated propaganda aimed at stirring public and official support from Western countries. The campaign includes language guides, key messages, and hundreds of propaganda posters, some of which contain fascist imagery and even praise neo-Nazi leaders. And he's got pictures of all of those flyers, those posters here. Highly recommend you look at them. Some of them are absolutely awful in terms of what they depict. they even seem to indicate in one of the last ones, there's one where Putin, a caricature of Putin, cartoon of him, has a bomb rammed up his ass and he's vomiting blood everywhere, which that evokes imagery of what they did to Gaddafi. Again, you're not trying to de-escalate if you're putting that stuff out into public. If the Russians and therefore Putin think that they're going to get Gaddafi'd, why would he come to the table diplomatically? You're only escalating with that type of propaganda. That's why our type of propaganda, the pro-peace and the activism propaganda, has to combat this style propaganda, but I digress. Behind Ukraine's public relations effort is an army of foreign political strategists, Washington, D.C. lobbyists, and a network of intelligence-linked media outlets. Ukraine's propaganda strategy earned it praise from a NATO commander who told the Washington Post, quote, "They are really excellent in stratcom, media, info ops, and also psyops." The Post ultimately conceded that, quote, "Western officials say that while they cannot independently verify much of the information that Kiev puts out about the evolving battlefield situation, including casualty figures for both sides, it nonetheless represents a highly effective stratcom," end quote. Key to the propaganda effort is an international legion of public relations firms working directly with Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs to wage information warfare. According to the industry news site PR Week, capital PR, the initiative was launched by an anonymous figure who allegedly founded a Ukraine-based public relations firm. Quote, "From the first hour of war, we decided to join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to help them distribute the official sources to show the truth," the nameless figure told PR Week. Quote, "This is a hybrid war, the mix of bloodily struggling fight with a huge disinformation and fake campaign led by Russia," end quote. According to the anonymous figure, more than 150 public relations firms have joined the propaganda blitz. So they've created a propaganda network via PR firms and, intelligence-linked or CIA-backed media outlets. The international effort is spearheaded by public relations firm PR Network co-founder Nikki Regazzoni and Francis Ingham, a top public relations consultant with close ties to UK's government. Ingram, it might be misspelled, Ingram, previously worked for Britain's Conservative Party, sits on the UK Government Communication Service Strategy and Evaluation Council, say that 5 times fast, is the chief executive of the International Communications Consultancy Organization and leads the membership body for UK Local Government Communicators, LG Comms. Quote, "We've been privileged to help coordinate efforts to support the Ukrainian government in the last few days," Ingham told Provoke Media. Quote, "Agencies have offered up entire teams to support Kiev in the communications war. Our support for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine is unwavering and will continue for as long as needed," end quote. With an anonymous Ukrainian figure joining 2 of the top public relations figures in Kiev government's propaganda blitz, Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs distributed a dossier, and he includes the dossier, it's archived here, with materials instructing public relations agencies on quote-unquote key messages, approved language, content for debunked propaganda constructs, far-right and neo-Nazi propaganda. The folder is run by Yaroslav Turbil, described in his LinkedIn page as, quote, "head of Ukraine.ua, Ukraine's digital ecosystem for global communications, strategic communications, and country brand promotion." Turbil has worked at multiple civil society organizations closely linked to the U.S. government and interned at Internews, a U.S. intelligence-linked organization that operates under the guise of promoting press freedom. Among the propaganda constructs distributed in the dossier is a video of the Snake Island incident, which was quickly proven false, in which Ukrainian border guards stationed on a small island were reported to have been killed after they told an approaching Russian warship that had urged them to surrender to go fuck yourself. President Zelensky held a press conference announcing he would award the men the Hero of Ukraine medal as mainstream media spread the story widely, including TYT. Cenk actually almost cried on his show when he read about that. But they don't check their sources. They're getting all of their information from the intelligentsia, the CIA-backed intelligentsia. They don't check that stuff. And then they later on were like, well, we weren't wrong. We just updated what we were talking about. Okay. However, the supposedly dead soldiers quickly turned up alive and well, proving their heroic stand was a farce. Despite the story being proved as fake, the dossier contains a propaganda video promoting it, and the link is right here. I highly recommend you watch. Another folder in the dossier is run by Ukrainian MFA graphic artist Dasha Podoltseva and contains hundreds of propaganda graphics submitted by artists in Europe and the United States. Some feature generic no-war messages, while dozens of other images celebrate the Ghost of Kiev, a heroic Ukrainian pilot who turns out to be non-existent, and the phony Snake Island 13 incident. Many use xenophobic and racist language, and some are explicit in their praise of prominent Ukrainian neo-Nazis, including C-14 leader Yevhen Karas, the right sector fascist paramilitary, and the neo-Nazi Azov Battalion. Oh man, but you won't see the neo-libs up in arms about that kind of language. They are too busy worrying about Joe Rogan's language and Russell Brand's language and all the other people actually telling the truth in this country's language. But when it comes down to actually praising Nazis and using them in their propaganda, they're, shh, don't look over here. These aren't the Nazis we like. We like these Nazis. They're not so bad. They're not so bad as far as Nazis go, right? That's the neo-libs for you. Multiple images call for Banderite smoothies, a reference to a Molotov cocktail named for the late OUNB commander Stefan Bandera, who collaborated with Nazi Germany in the mass murder of Jews and ethnic Poles during World War II. Another image depicts a book title, quote, Encyclopedia of Incurable Diseases, listing Russia, Belarus, North Korea, Syria, and Eritrea. So I highly recommend you have a look at these. There's a lot of them here. I'm going to scroll down past them, and we're going to finish this up here. Here we go. Foreign extremists flock to Ukraine. The dossier also contains a link to a Ministry of Foreign Affairs page called The Fight for Ukraine, which provides instructions for foreigners who wish to join Ukraine's neo-Nazi-infested armed forces, termed the International Defense Legion of Ukraine. Following Zelensky's call for foreign fighters to form a brigade, fighters from all over the world, including the US, UK, Canada, Australia, Spain, Colombia, Brazil, Chile, and more, have traveled to face Russian forces. Others with no combat training or experience have arrived for war tourism, quote-unquote, what one British soldier called bullet catchers. Yeah, that's a lot of the U.S. people that are like, hey, I can go over there. I've played Call of Duty before. I'm going to be just fine. And then they run, screaming with their tail between their legs because they realize the Russians are really not fucking around. So let's go down a little bit further here, talk about phrases that were promoted and others that were banned in terms of when you do your propaganda, what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say, and then we'll go just a little bit further beyond that to the troll farms and we'll call it a day. You can read the article for yourself. Correct wording. One document inside the dossier delineates acceptable language on the conflict with Russia as determined by the Ukrainian government. Quote, such Russian cliches like referendum in Crimea or will of the people of Crimea are absolutely unacceptable, the document states in reference to the 2014 overwhelmingly successful referendum to separate from Ukraine. The Donbass, the people voted on a referendum to become independent from West Ukraine, and it passed in both regions over 90%, and I forget, one of them was 96%, so that's Donetsk and Luhansk. They both voted in that referendum to become independent from West Ukraine. That's what it's referring to. The document deems unacceptable terms civil war on Donbass, internal conflict, conflict in Ukraine, and Ukrainian crisis to describe the Ukrainian military's war with the breakaway republics of the Donbass region. This, despite the fact that the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights estimates that 14,200 people, including 3,400 civilians, have been killed in internal fighting in Ukraine since 2014. The vast majority, over 80% of those, by the way, are Russian-speaking separatists. So I guess the argument could be made that they are more participating in a genocide than the Russians with their invasion right now, who are arguably not. But I digress. We'll go to key messages. Another document titled Key Messages contains specific propaganda claims that were widely disseminated in mainstream Western media, which have since been discredited. One section claims the, quote, entire Europe was put on the brink of nuclear disaster when the Russian troops began shelling the largest Europe nuclear power plant. However, International Atomic Energy Agency's Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi said that the building hit by Russian projectiles at the plant was, quote, not part of the reactor, but instead a training center. Russian troops also left Ukrainian workers to continue operating the plant. And there's a video below of Scott Ritter talking about this. Again, he just got censored off of Twitter. I believe he might be back now. Highly recommend you watch that video. I linked to a bunch of his videos in my previous Rockfin episode talking about him and George Galloway being labeled Russian state-affiliated media. Another section thanks Turkey for the decision, quote, to block the access of Russian warships to the Black Sea. However, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan closed the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles Straits to all military vessels, preventing both NATO and Russian vessels from accessing the Black Sea. Among the document's key messages is a statement of gratitude to the anti-war demonstrations held by citizens of many nations throughout the world demonstrate strong support to Ukraine in defending against Russia. This refers to large pro-Ukraine demonstrations in Europe which have featured calls for the U.S. and NATO to establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine and shoot down Russian military aircraft, potentially transforming the conflict into a world war between nuclear-armed powers. And that's exactly what it would do. That's exactly what it would do. Those protesters are, again, I don't know if they're just useful idiots or if they're plants, but that's what you're advocating for. Whether you know that or not is irrelevant. The ultimate outcome of trying to protest for a no-fly zone to protect Ukraine, it dooms the rest of the world to nuclear war, more than likely, or at least hot war between two nuclear-capable countries, which I don't know about you guys, but I don't want that. Quote, despite Russia's propaganda, there is no discrimination based on race or nationality, including when it comes to the crossing of the state border by foreign citizens, claims the Ukrainian document. However, numerous videos and reports have documented Ukrainian authorities preventing Africans from fleeing the fighting. Even the New York Times, hardly a bastion of Kremlin propaganda, published a report documenting these racist practices. One message says that, quote, on March 16th, the Russian forces dropped a bomb on a drama theater where up to 1,300 civilians were being sheltered. The number of casualties is still unknown. And I covered this, and he's going to mention it here. That was a false flag. However, as Max Blumenthal reported, the explosion appears to be the result of a false flag operation designed by the neo-Nazi Azov Battalion and aimed at triggering a NATO intervention. So basically, they prop up a whole bunch of these things that are not true and, of course, boost false flags or potential false flags. Last part here, we'll talk about the troll farms. NATO-backed troll farms. Another anonymously penned investigation shows how Ukrainian public relations firms have used targeted advertisements to astroturf Russian internet and social media networks with messaging calling to economically isolate Moscow and stop the war. This effort is led by a guy whose name I can barely pronounce here, Evgeny Vitalyevich, who uses the alias Evgeny Korolev, along with Pavel Antonov of the Targetorium organization. From behind this Korolev pseudonym, the Ukrainian information warrior composed a post on his Facebook page, which is now private, boasting that his firm's Facebook ads achieved 30 million hits in 3 days. At the same time, Facebook has blocked Russian state-owned media outlets from running ads and monetizing their content. Several fake accounts from media outlets like Russia24 have sprung up, burying the authentic account under a series of imposters. Facebook has also marked statements from Russian officials, including the Ministry of Defense, as quote-unquote false. This campaign has reportedly been carried out upon recommendation from StopFake, a self-described fact-checking outlet that is funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. Oh, sounds legit. More fact-checkers that are propped up by the National Endowment for Democracy, which and the Atlantic Council, Czech and UK foreign ministries, and the International Renaissance Foundation, which is funded by billionaire George Soros' Open Society Foundation. StopFake was hired by Facebook in March 2020 to, quote, curb the flow of Russian propaganda, but was found to be employing multiple figures closely tied to violent neo-Nazis. The journalist who co-authored the expose received death threats and ultimately fled Ukraine. Those revelations have apparently not prevented Facebook from relying on the organization for censorship guidance. Meanwhile, Russian hackers located a public Google document, which has since been made private but is uploaded here, which I highly recommend you click on it because it has been made private. Thank God Dan Cohen saved it. It details the propaganda operation, which has been distributed in Telegram channels of creative farms, quote unquote. Quote, here you can find links to Ukrainian media that need promotion, bot accounts with logins and passwords from which anti-war messages and messages with fakes about the Ministry of Defense were sent to users, theses, and specific instructions on which posts and which audiences to embroider, the investigation reads. Another campaign is run by Natalia Popovich, the founder of the public relations agency One Philosophy in Kiev. Popovich's LinkedIn profile shows she has worked with the U.S. State Department and advised former President Petro Poroshenko. She is also co-founder and board member of the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, a propaganda arm funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development, the National Endowment for Democracy, again, and the U.S. Embassy and NATO, among others. So I highly recommend you actually read this whole article. Click on some of the links, check the archives, the databases that are now private. But this tells you exactly how this has all come together as not only it's a multifaceted propaganda campaign with links to U.S. intelligence, financial links to a whole bunch of PR firms who are basically like, we have to promote the war in Ukraine together. Hundreds of PR firms. And we have to also make sure that we use our troll accounts and promote this in any way that we can. If there are people that you notice that are on Twitter or on social media that are only running with like U.S. State Department talking points and they get tons of likes, tons of shares, even though their rhetoric isn't at all poignant, well thought out, chances are they're part of this apparatus, whether they meant to be or not. So there are, I'm not going to name any names, but the Twitter accounts and the YouTubers that are going down that, the Abigail Thorne lane, if you will, which again, that was another great article by Kit Clarenberg that talked about BreadTube. These people are either useful idiots for the CIA-driven narrative, or they are literally being backed or funded by one of these PR firms. This dossier is extremely incriminating, but it doesn't tell us anything that we don't already know about how this operates. So what do? We fight exactly what they're trying to do here. We make sure we promote our good journalists who are citing their sources. That's what I'm doing right now. But we also have to go out there and try to destroy the propagandist narrative, which they're going to run with like crazy. Within like 5 hours of the recent killings in Bucha, every mainstream media outlet was running with that story. And even the New York Times admitted this isn't independently verified. Well, that begs the question then, why are all of you in a coordinated fashion running with it as if it's Russia's fault, as if they absolutely executed these people in Bucha, if you can't independently verify that that's the case? And then the next question is also, as far as the Americans' involvement in that, when Russia then calls for an independent investigation at the UN Security Council, the United States has UK, which is the head of the Security Council, block that request. So basically we're like, our media apparatus goes out there and says, well, this was definitely Russia's doing in Bucha. And Russia goes, well, if that's the case, then why don't we open up an independent investigation to see if what you're claiming about us is true? And the United States just goes, nah. NATO nations are like, nah, we don't want to independently investigate this. Why would they do that? Are they afraid that they would, if an independent investigation happened, that they would uncover another false flag? I don't know. But it seems weird. If you're so sure that the Russians did this in Bucha, you would want an independent investigation that would confirm that allegation and confirm what all of your mainstream media outlets have been saying. So it's just a little bit squirrely, a little bit, makes you wonder. Anyway, I want you guys to sub to Dan Cohen on Twitter. He does a show Behind the Headlines for Mint Press News. I will put a link to this article below, and I'll also link to the video that he did on Mint Press News covering this story. Highly recommend you watch that video and read the article for yourself. And keep fighting that good fight. Keep protecting our journalists. They are our warriors. They are our last defense against the censorship apocalypse. So I'll talk to you guys later.